This call may be monitored and recorded for quality assurance.
This job would be great if it wasn't for the fucking customers.
You're always this stupid. It is you take lessons. Just calm down.
Oh, fuck you!
You can't handle the truth.
This call may be monitored and recorded for quality assurance.
In other words, be nice, asshole. Welcome to a very special episode of Q is in Cucumber. I'm Lara Mack. I do not have Tanya with me today. Tanya is going through quite the life change right now. It's a good thing. It's a good thing, I promise. But I do want to let her talk about that. But it's going to keep her a little bit occupied for a while. So I decided to do this little experiment. I trust you guys, those of you who already subscribed and listen and comment. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. So if you guys are like, we don't want to hear you talking alone in your office to yourself, Laura, that's okay. Feel free to let me know. So like many of you out there, I am true crime obsessed. Those of you who have listened to the show before probably know that. I torture Jessica and Tanya constantly. But pretty much anything true crime, I'm there. And in looking for stories to do deep dives, I run across these stories sometimes that are interesting and I want to talk about, but they don't quite fit into what the show is. So I thought this would be a fun time when it's just me alone in my office to share some of those stories with you. So this is going to be the first episode of the Q is in Cucumber Money and Murder series with Lara Mack. So buckle up. So the first story that we're going to talk about is one that I've seen pop up for me a few times over the years that I thought would be fun to revisit. It's one that there have been episodes of 48 Hours, Dateline, Snapped did an episode on it, because it's just wild. It's wild what happened, but it's also wild the way that it played out and who the perpetrator of the crime tried to blame. We're going to talk about the Novak murders. Have y'all heard about this? Ben and Bernice Novack? Get on board this crazy train. It's going to be a ride. Ben Jr. and his mother Bernice were both murdered just a few short months apart, and it was a wild scandal, especially when you found out who they were and where they came from. So first we're going to talk about Ben Sr., obviously Ben Jr.'s father, and his wife Bernice. Ben was the youngest child to Jewish immigrants from Russia. His father had opened his own clothing store once they immigrated, but after the store failed, the family moved to the Catskill Mountains, where he operated a hotel in an area known as the Borscht Belt, which I fell down a bit of a rabbit hole. I'm not going to go into it, but it was really interesting to read about that. But after Ben Sr.'s father passed, Ben and his brothers actually operated the hotel. But disagreements led him to move on, and he moved to New York City, where he actually Americanized his name. His last name initially was Novick, and changed it to Novak. I'm not entirely clear on the reason why that Americanized it that much. I have to assume this is one of those sign of the times things that's just kind of beyond me. But I thought that was kind of interesting. He ran a haberdashery, but that store also failed when he had a falling out with his partner. This becomes a theme when you actually deep dive into this story. It's like when you meet somebody who's been married like 6 times and they brag like, I know how to be married. Clearly not very well. Because who's the common denominator here? But I digress. In 1940, Novak and his wife Bella, and yes, I said Bella, not Bernice. We'll get there. But Novak and his wife Bella, with whom they had an adopted son named Ronald, moved to Miami Beach. They had liquidated everything they could, and they had about $1,800, and they moved to Miami Beach. Now, at the time, even though this was quite literally during the Great Depression, Miami Beach was a happening place to be. I don't know for sure, but this feels to me like a period of time where wealthy people and snowbirds seem to become a little bit synonymous. The wealthy came to Miami Beach during the winter and lived it up. So they called it the playground of the rich. Now, he ended up raising additional funds and he purchased a 111-room hotel called Monroe Towers, which he turned into a lucrative investment, which this feels like right place, right time, when the U.S. got involved in World War II. And there was a training facility nearby, and they needed basic living space for the 100,000 soldiers that were rotating in and out for training. So he ended up earning like a boatload of money. And with his earnings, he bought out his partners, and he went on to purchase a couple more hotels, including Cornell and the Atlantis. Now, in 1951, he and Bella divorced. But why they got a divorce was really interesting. Stuff like this is always fascinating, where I'm like, really? These are the choices. This felt like a good move for everybody. Ben was a playboy, and that was really no secret. But one day he saw a woman named Bernice Mildred Stimple and was instantly smitten. But she was married, and so was he. And she basically was like, thanks, no thanks. I'm not blowing up my life to be your mistress. Have a nice day. Practical. Good job. But this is back during a period of time where stalking was considered romantic. I know that sounds weird, but he basically stalked her. And I'm not going to lie, that's kind of how one set of my grandparents got together. So on one hand, I'm like, thanks, or I wouldn't be here. But on the other hand, I'm like, ugh, yuck. That's not cute. Anyway, in order to get with Bernice, he divorced Bella just to be with Bernice. And for some reason, that was, again, different time. She was like, oh, you blew up your family for me? How romantic. I'll get a divorce too. So she got a divorce too. And the two of them ended up together. The real life Cinderella. But she kind of did end up being Cinderella. Because Ben Sr. had this idea for this glorious hotel that the Vegas hotel magnate Steve Wynn later said was the first hotel that would become part of the show, like the concept of the hotel itself. It was a place to people watch. It was a place to celebrity watch. It was a place that you could, do all kinds of decadent things and take in amazing shows, and just being there was an experience. And Ben Sr. raised additional funds, partly from some mobsters, which I thought was kind of interesting, named Sam Giancana and Joseph Fischetti, to build the Fontainebleau Hotel. Which, if you ever see pictures of it, I believe it looks like a big croissant. But architecturally, everything that went into this was a big deal. But as part of the show, it wasn't just the hotel and the celebrities. It was also Ben and Bernice. They played host and hostess to their wealthy and famous and powerful guests. Bernice would descend from this grand staircase for parties that they called the staircase to nowhere because it didn't really have a function as far as it needed to be there to get to the second floor. There were other places to go, but this staircase was just for this grand entrance. That seemed to be its only purpose, was to make a grand entrance for celebrities, for events, for weddings, whatever was going on. And she would descend from the staircase with her fiery red hair and her amazing designer clothes, because they lived in the penthouse. This was their home. And she would come down along with Ben, and they would schmooze their rich and powerful guests all night long. And when I say celebrities, I mean like the celebrities of the day, okay? You're talking Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack. You're talking Bob Hope. You're talking JFK, Marilyn Monroe. The list just went on and on and on and on and on. Eventually, the hotel would actually be featured in movies like Scarface and Goldfinger. Are you freaking serious? Like, that's a claim to fame right there. Within the same calendar year that the hotel opened, Ben and Bernice welcomed their son, Ben Jr. The hotel staff would call him Benji to differentiate the two. But they also called him Benji just to piss him off. Which on one hand, I'm like, wow, these adults are bullying this kid. But the more you find out about his childhood and the way he behaved, you kind of understood why people would do it. I know that sounds awful. I'm a terrible person. Sorry. So Bernice and Ben Sr. clearly did not seem to have an interest in actually raising him at all. He was handed off to housekeepers, security guards, hotel staff, anybody they could get, mostly the security guards, to watch him. When he would have birthday parties, they would throw these elaborate parties pretty much for their celebrity guests. There would be no kids there. And they would bring Ben down and, everybody would, oh, he's so cute, and like pinch his cheeks and then pat him on the butt and send him back up to the penthouse for his birthday cake to be delivered by room service and for him to eat it alone. That's horrible. That is horrifying. Like, take 5 minutes and spend some time with your kid. When he would go trick-or-treating, he would go with the chauffeur. He would get dropped off at school in a limousine, which didn't help the school situation at all. Come on, you can't let him walk, ride a bike, I don't know. But as a result of this, he really became, from a very early age, from most accounts, a little tyrant with zero social skills. He would, as a kid, apparently just fire people. And he would treat underlings as if he owned the hotel. And no one could stop him. He's the owner's son. And even though he's a little tyrant, what are you going to do? The parents didn't care, it seemed like. And I'm sorry, if you give a little kid that much non-attention and unlimited resources, I love my son and I think he's amazing, but I think my son, any little kid, is going to turn into a tyrant. I don't know what else you could really expect, quite frankly. But the killer part, where I'm honestly 60-40, like, yes, he was a tyrant, but look at the way he was raised. This was the story that I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to forgive a lot of that from him. Because of his high-profile parents, with their high-profile friends and their high-profile wealth, there were several credible warnings that Ben was targeted for kidnapping. There were people that Ben Sr. dealt with that apparently would just threaten him to his face that they were going to kidnap Ben. And basically say, if you don't pay up or give me this cut or whatever, I'm going to kidnap your kid, blah, blah, blah. Nothing ever happened, but as a parent, I would think that would make you hold your child that much closer. Oh no, not Ben and Bernice. They're like, hey, be careful out there. And they didn't do jack about it. Nothing. They were just like, wow, okay. I mean, it really felt like they patted him on the head and be like, it's a dangerous world out there. Good luck. And just let him be. They never seemed to do anything to protect him. I honestly feel like if it had actually happened, they might have just like sipped their martinis and gone, oh, bummer. Another drink? Like, that truly is the impression that I get from these people. Now, Ben Jr. retreated into his world of specifically television and comic books. He was a massive Batman fan. And you have to remember, at this time when he was a child, this is the period of the OG, Adam West Batman. Come on. I miss Adam West. Anyway, Ben Jr. would start collecting Batman memorabilia, of course, because his parents gave him the money to do it, and he did it. And he started collecting from a very, very young age. And when he got older, he actually had a tricked out replica of the original 1966 Batmobile. And I couldn't find a definitive answer on this because I saw this in multiple places, but I couldn't really nail down it for sure. He had a Batman memorabilia collection that was either the largest in the world at one point or the second largest in the world. I'm not sure. But with as many Batman fans are out there, to get like the largest or even the second largest, that's a lot. Like, I'm hardcore jealous. So that was little Benji's childhood, essentially. The good times didn't really last forever, though, like they never do. In 1977, the Fountain Blue filed for federal bankruptcy protection, and in 1978, Stephen Moss bought it for about $27 million. It did not stay with the Novaks. Now, Ben Sr., I could not nail this down either, but I thought this was interesting. I don't believe Ben and Bernice officially divorced. I don't think it was official like that, because obviously, if he'll cheat for you, he'll cheat on you. So, of course, he had mistresses. But around 1980-ish, it looks like they actually might have separated. It seemed like they were living in separate homes. And there was a woman who claimed to have been living with Ben Sr. for the last 5 years of his life. So from 80 to 85. Her name was Juana Rodriguez, who was a former Miss Uruguay. And right before Ben Sr.'s death in 1985, Ben Jr. was actually in the process of trying to get his father declared incompetent, because it seems like Miss Uruguay over here was just bleeding what was left of the family fortune dry and was keeping Ben Sr. sedated and limiting his access to friends and relatives, which, is what you do when you're being a shady Miss Uruguay. However, before any determination could be made either way, Ben Sr. passed away from lung and heart failure in 1985. Now, Ben in his teenage years and early 20s, he had been raised in this very decadent environment. And when he was younger, he would be that kid that seemed to inappropriately flirt with older women. And they would go, "Oh, how cute." But as soon as he kind of crossed the line into where they felt like it was appropriate, I have no idea the age, just saying, he was hooking up with these women left and right. He was just like his father as far as just being a hardcore playboy. But he didn't seem to have the charm of his parents necessarily, but he did seem to have a head for business at least. So in 1978, he created an event planning business that he called Convention Concepts Unlimited. This is an article by Luis Andres Haneo and Douglas Hanks from the Miami Herald-McClatchy Tribune Regional News. And it says, the Fort Lauderdale company's website links to a short biography that touts, quote, the legendary Ben Novack Sr., and notes the younger Novack, quote, literally grew up at the Fountain Blue, where the Novaks lived in a penthouse apartment. People who did business with Novack describe him as gruff, profane, and difficult. After his father's bankruptcy, Novack built his convention planning business around a major client, Amway. For those of you who listened to the last few episodes of our Theranos stuff, talking about the DeVosses, apparently we just can't escape Amway right now. Back to the article. The retail giant that uses a global network of individuals to sell its products for living rooms and kitchen tables. Executives in South Florida's meeting business describe Novack as one of the top event planners for Amway. So basically what this business was telling these companies who maybe didn't have the resources to have an in-house event planner to say, okay, we want to get everybody together on this date for this long, and we want to have speakers and we want to have workshops, etc., etc. Basically giving them a list of everything, and they would handle it all. They would find the locations, they would negotiate the contracts, they would set it all up, they would run it, they would find the speakers. They seemed to kind of be like a one-stop shop convention store. And because Ben Novack Jr. had grown up around and in hotels, he seemed to know how to navigate that world because that's where all these conventions were being held, at hotels. So it really seemed like he found a pretty decent niche. The company seemed to be doing well. I thought it was interesting that it was an all-cash business. I don't know why that would be a cash business, but apparently he had cash, a lot of it, on hand, a lot, because he would only get paid in cash. I'm not going to disparage anybody, but you can take from that what you will. So throughout the 80s, Ben was really continuing his womanizing ways, and he could constantly be found in strip clubs and all kinds of places like that. And there's nothing wrong with it. Have fun. Do what you want to do. But then he met a woman named Narcy. Let's talk about Narcy. Narcy Feliz was born in Ecuador in 1956. She was the baby of 9 children to rather well-off farmers and grew up really comfortably. She was the absolute apple of her father's eye. She was close with all of her siblings, but she was described as a person that wanted a more lavish lifestyle rather than a comfortable lifestyle. So when she was a teenager, she ended up hooking up and marrying a local businessman who frequently traveled to the United States. And they had a daughter together named May, and they moved to the US, specifically to New York. But once she was out of that farming community in Ecuador, she really was like, oh, there are more wealthy men than just the one wealthy dude in my little town in Ecuador. I could upgrade. And she split with him like that. She was 22. And she began making what I call the, quote, gold digger rounds. Just dating every wealthy man she could lay her hands on. Squeezing as much out of him as she could until her time ran out, basically. And with these men, she would travel the world with them. She would just leave. And she technically had her daughter, May. And she would dump May off with whoever would take her for weeks, sometimes months at a time. You got to remember, this is before the days of cell phones. It's not like you could just call up and be like, hey, are you coming to get your kid? These people that had May would have to track her down wherever she was, which sometimes that alone took weeks. And be like, hey, you coming to get your kid, or is she ours now? I don't know what's happening. And poor May. May is interviewed in a lot of these documentaries. Maybe I'm biased. My mother's name is May, and she just seems like truly a very nice woman. And my heart goes out to her, even though she's, I think, only like a year or two older than me, maybe. I kind of want to adopt her. My heart seriously breaks for this girl, because she clearly had a really messed up childhood. But she's just so resolved about it. That's the only word. She's clearly not bitter. She doesn't come across as being bitter or angry. Oh, woe is me. She really comes across as, yep, this is my childhood. And she actually said, the best thing about my childhood is that it is over. But she doesn't come across as being a brat about it. And honestly, she kind of could. Just like Ben could in a certain way. You could kind of understand why she could. But finally, in the early 80s, Narcy decided to move to South Florida. And it was a bit of a hot spot at the time as far as wealthy men. But she didn't land one as easily and as quickly as she would have liked. And she ended up as one... This is so horrible. I could not believe this guy said this in one of the specials. The detective said she ended up as, quote, working her way up to be a stripper. Which the interviewer calls out that statement, just implying or flat out saying she was a sex worker. Now, I'm not going to say anything about that. I don't think there's shame in sex working or stripping necessarily, as long as you're being safe as possible. Just me, do you. But this is what Narcy was doing until she found her next meal ticket. And that is when Narcy met Ben Novack Jr. They met at a strip club, and he convinced her to go on a date. And there's some dramatized versions of how they met, but I could not nail down what was true. So I'm just going to leave that alone. You can watch some of the specials. It was kind of entertaining, some of the dramatization. So one thing they apparently had in common was Ben liked to be dominated, and Narcy had some dominatrix tendencies. So nothing wrong with that. But he took her all over town, bought her expensive gifts, and really just seemed to be obsessed with her. And as she was, and as a fiery hothead, like he really was obsessed. Now, Ben's mother, Bernice, her dream was that he would settle down with a nice Jewish girl, and then he brings home this single mother, stripper, immigrant from Ecuador. And Bernice was not thrilled. She was rather horrified. And their relationship, Bernice and Narcy, was strained from the jump. However, I do think this speaks at least a little bit to Bernice and the rest of the family's character, at least a little bit, is that May said that Bernice and the rest of Ben's family, well, they weren't really big fans of Narcy. They tried really hard to be kind and to welcome May into the family. But that seemed to make Narcy really jealous, which feels very narcissistic on one level. I would be thrilled, like somebody, you're being nice to my child. You're not treating her like, I don't know, maybe this is my own personal theory here, but it makes me feel like they were welcoming to her because she was a child, possibly, but they also maybe weren't welcoming to Narcy, not because of the fact she was a stripper immigrant from Ecuador, blah, 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 but because of just who Narcy was. Narcy does not seem like a good person at all. Now, in 1991, Ben and Narcy got married. There was a prenup that was signed, but the prenup would only give Narcy $65,000 if they were to ever divorce. But after the marriage, they moved into one of those communities in Florida called the Seven Isle. That was one of those communities that felt like it was for wealthy people who specifically wanted to show off their wealth. May was eventually sent to a boarding school, and she described her and Ben's relationship as distant at first, but eventually they would really form a very strong bond. And this part of the story made me really happy. I think because the two of them eventually figured out that they were kindred spirits. They both had these really lonely childhoods, just on different ends of the spectrum. You know, him being the boy in the bubble in this wealthy penthouse, and her being shuffled off from one random family of strangers to another while her mother wined and dined all over the world. They really were kindred in that way and became very close, to the point where people thought that May was Ben's daughter and Narcy was May's stepmother. Now, when May eventually had kids, Narcy, apparently, this is Narcy's one kind of redeeming quality in this whole story, is that while she seemed like a really crappy mom and just overall not a nice person, she apparently was a fantastic grandmother and adored her and Ben. Both adored May's boys. She had 2 boys. Now, with the convention organizing business, eventually Narcy and May were heavily involved and worked for the company. And because Ben didn't really have those social skills or charm that his parents had had, Narcy was really able to go in and smooth out Ben's rough edges when it came to business dealings. But their marriage was rocky between her temper and, once again, even though he was obsessed with her, with Ben's infidelity. They would get into just raucous fights. And May described in this where I was like, bitch, you are crossing a line that you do not want to cross, okay? Apparently, in some of their fights, she would threaten multiple times to throw all of Ben's Batman memorabilia into the canal behind their house. Bitch, that's not something you joke about. I'm sorry. I got a tiny little bit of Batman memorabilia, and if my husband ever touched it, you'd never find his body. Just saying. Now, in 2002, there was a bit of a foreshadowing incident to what would eventually occur. This is from an article from the Ocala Star-Banner. This is, quote, "The prosecution is likely to allude to a 2002 Fort Lauderdale police report in which Ben Novack alleged that his wife tied him to a chair for 25 hours and left with $440,000 in cash and his corporate files. She said it was part of a sex game and told the police that her husband hit her often and once broke her nose. According to the report, she said that her husband took her to a plastic surgeon to repair her nose, and when she woke up after the surgery, she had breast implants she hadn't asked for." Okay. I'm just pausing the article here. What? I beg your pardon? Okay. We'll just move on from that. To somehow boost her claim, she told the cops, quote, "The report says Narcy Novack showed the police nude photos of women with artificial limbs and went into a rather long and detailed statement of the sexual desires of Ben Novack." So, pausing right here. Apparently, Ben was into bondage and BDSM and things like that, but also had a kink with amputee porn, which, okay. Get your freak on. I really don't know what to say. I just don't find that to be deviant. It is what it is. Are they actually amputating in the video? Let's not go there. But just being an amputee porn, me personally, I just don't give a shit. I just think this is funny to me that she was like, yes, I tied him to a chair. Look, he likes to look at women with one arm. Like, what? Okay, why is that an excuse? I really do not understand why that was an excuse. But back to the article. Ben was found by May, the daughter, his stepdaughter, tied in Ben's home, having been there for about a day. He filed a police report and claimed that Narcy had done this to him, that she and some associates had tied him up and beaten him until he gave up the combo to a safe that he had changed the combo to. He gave it up, they got away with about $440K and left him there. May found him. Now, at first, he seemed to be like super fired up and ready to charge her ass, which, good. This is, okay. Now, she claimed that this was all part of their BDSM sex play and showed them a ton of pictures and shit proving the kind of stuff they were into. It still doesn't add up to me. Like, usually with stuff like that, the other person stays in the room, or at least in the same zip code. She tied him up and left him for 25 hours tied to a chair. Not... Lucy, you got some explaining to do. This does not make sense. But then she ended up paying back like a third of the money to him, and they reconciled, and he quietly dropped the charges. No. No. But in 2000, so that was 2002. So again, their marriage continues. It's still rocky, but they're trucking along. But in 2008, Ben started what it seemed to be a real marriage-threatening affair with a woman named Rebecca Bliss. And Rebecca seems like she was, according to media reports, like a deadbeat mom and eventually became a porn star that she changed her name to Mona Love. I personally think Rebecca Bliss is a fine porn star name. Mona Love is not the comedian, by the way. This is a different Mona Love. I checked with the men in my life to understand this. But Ben had put her up in an apartment, and he would shower her with gifts, and they genuinely seemed to love each other. But Narcy found out and hunted her down. And at first, she called her and tried to fuck with her, saying, oh, well, you know you're not the only one. But Bliss knew that wasn't true and seemed unbothered. And this is why I think they genuinely cared for each other. She was just like, okay, and? I know that's not true. So then Narcy changed tactics. Then she tried bribing her with $10,000 to ditch him. That didn't work either. Then Narcy started the crazy ex-girlfriend shit, even though she was the wife. She tried to get her evicted from her place, slashed her tires, prank phone calls, like real kind of Jodi Arias level shit. Ben had affairs before, but it seems like she could see this one was a real threat, like an actual like, oh fuck, I'm screwed. Now, May actually found out about the affair in December of 2008, and her and Ben talked about it, and Ben even openly discussed divorcing Narcy with May. Which kind of to me tells me how close Ben and May were and how kind of cut out of the loop that Narcy was with her own daughter. Because it doesn't I couldn't really nail this down, but the fact that May didn't tell Narcy, I'm not sure how Narcy found out, but I don't believe May told her. The fact that she didn't, and she seemed to kind of be on Ben's side, I think that says a lot, but that's just me. Now, on April 5th, 2009, so just a few months later, Bernice, Ben's mom, was found dead in her laundry room. Now, in the words of the immortal Bailey Sarian, it was suspicious as fuck. But no one seemed to care. That's what I think is bizarre. This was written off as an accident. Bernice apparently had a fall recently. There were indications at the time that she thought Narcy had poisoned her, but it was never confirmed. And it was assumed this time that it was just another bad fall, and she had injured herself and kept trying to get up and kept falling again. But any student of true crime could have looked at this police report and been like, yo, we got a problem over here. Like, this does not take Benson and Stabler to figure out, okay? The photographs show blood splattered all over the place. The autopsy report said she had massive head injuries, a fractured skull, a broken jaw, and a broken finger. There was blood in her car and a trail of droplets through the house and blood spatter everywhere, which would indicate someone being struck. This was not a fall and get up and fall and get up, especially when you look at the crime scene photos. It's wild. I'll post the links down in the description. I was like, really? Y'all wrote that off, huh? It's like there was a story, I can't remember which one it was. It was a story about a woman who was found, bound with her arms behind her back, bound at her wrist, naked and hung over a balcony, and the cops were like, oh, suicide. I was like, wait, what? Who does... Okay, we're really reaching here for this, but all right. Yet detectives never took fingerprints or DNA samples. The photographs of the crime scene were what experts have called almost embarrassingly inadequate. I'm going to call that grade A lazy. At the time, even Ben Jr. felt something wasn't right, telling detectives that the glass of white wine on the table was suspect because his mother didn't drink white wine. Now, to back up here a little bit, Ben, as I said earlier, he was raised in the hotel mostly by staff and particularly by security guards. And because of that, I think, this is Laura speculation here, but he ended up becoming a volunteer police officer. So a lot of these cops knew him and were friends with him. So it really does kind of blow my mind that even for quote unquote one of their own, they just didn't care. It's just odd to me. It's very odd to me. Now, there was a reporter at the time named Julie K. Brown who didn't believe it was an accident and kept trying to push detectives and others to look at it. She even pulled together a lot of the evidence to show to law enforcement and to retired police detectives, trying to get anybody to listen to see if she could get some traction here, but nobody bought it. Now, Ben was distraught over the loss of his mother. And according to May, Narcy was the most loving and attentive she'd ever seen her at that point, comforting Benji. Now, after that, May decided she was going to give Benji a gift, which I thought this was very sweet. She decided she was going to complete the paperwork to be legally adopted by Ben, which, yes, you can adopt an adult. We adopted our son as an adult. It's super cheap, honestly. Like, he was 17 when he moved in with us. We adopted him when he was 18 because it was only $250 and a visit from social services. Thank you very much. Super easy. But she thought it would be a nice gesture for his birthday, but the process was never finalized, which is sad. But 3 months later, in Rybrook, New York, at a Hilton hotel, Ben, Narcy, and May were in town managing an Amway convention. Now, here's the timeline of the day of the murder, basically. At 7:17 a.m., Narcy came down from her room and seemed to plant herself, just like Sandra Bullock in Ocean's 8, in front of a security camera to make sure she was seen. Like, standing there for what seemed to be no apparent reason, directly in line with a security camera. And then almost 30 minutes later exactly, she goes back up to the room, and she claims that when she opened the door, she quote-unquote tripped over Ben, who was hogtied, beaten, and had his eyes sliced out. Ugh. Clearly, he was dead. Now, she ran screaming and called for help. One of the hotel workers came and found May and brought her upstairs. And May heard someone say, "It's a bloodbath in there." And when she heard about her mother, quote unquote, tripping over him, she was confused as to why she didn't have any sort of anything on her. If it was a bloodbath and you tripped over him, it makes it seem like you fell, but there's no blood on you. This is weird. But she also thought it was odd that she heard her mother ask one of the detectives, did he have a heart attack? How many heart attacks have any of y'all seen that end up looking like a pig was slaughtered? I haven't seen it, but if you have, comment down below. Now, plus the way her mom was acting was making May super suspicious, like right from the jump. But she felt bad, even with this relationship with this crazy woman. She felt bad for even suspecting her mother. She just kept thinking like, oh, I'm a horrible person. How could anybody believe this about their own mother? But her mother's performance of being hysterical just made her even more suspicious. It did not take long for May to get suspicious of her. And at one point, she even told her to knock off the dramatics, essentially. Now, the cops were kind of at a loss. Naturally, the first suspicion is going to be the spouse no matter what. But her story didn't help that suspicion. Because when they looked at the key cards, they were confused as to how no one had, quote, like broken into the room. The only key entries were hers. So did Ben let someone in, or did she let someone in? She tried to say that she wasn't sure if she closed the door to the room all the way. So it seemed to be her going, oh, but what if I left the door open? What if I didn't close it all the way? What if this is my fault? Oh, God, forgive me. Like that kind of acting. But in my experience, most hotel doors don't just stay open like that. They close by themselves for a reason. Now, they ended up finding a witness that seemed to see Narcy letting a couple of dudes into the room. But she kind of just flowed with the story. She just kept... It's the Wanda Sykes, you got to stick with your lie. You got to stick with your lie. But apparently because the convention business was all cash, it lent to more suspicion that, oh, well, maybe other people knew this was all cash and they were going to rob him. Because there was quite literally cash everywhere around these people. But to claim that all of this stuff was done in this tiny little 30-minute window, the hog tying, the beating, the eye slicing, all this stuff in this perfect little window that you happened to leave right when it started and you came back right when it was probably over. Hard to swallow even for the cops who looked at Bernice's crime scene and were like, oh, yep, accident. So they took May and Narcy to the police station for questioning. And they questioned. But Narcy stonewalled. And they really didn't have anything. But they did ask if they would take lie detector tests. Now, May passed her lie detector test. Narcy did not. But because she stonewalled, you can't arrest them based on just a lie detector test alone. Like, that's why they went in. If you ever watched the Chris Watts interrogation video, that's why as soon as they're like, Chris, it's time. It's time. Tell us that we know you're lying. Tell us the truth. It's time. It's time. Like, as he's trying to stick with the story, they're just continuing to do it. He folded. Narcy did not. She really stuck with the story. But I do think that the interview itself is interesting because it's a portrait in stamina. And I don't know what this says about somebody mentally. Like, I feel like in this moment, she had the mental stamina of a peak performing Olympic athlete or something. Because they questioned her for like 12 hours. She never ate anything. She never drank anything. She never asked to go to the bathroom. Nothing. And they even said, like, it was wild that she just sat and maintained this story for 12 hours, not asking for anything, not taking a break, not nothing. I don't know why I find that to be the most terrifying part of this story. I really don't. But for some reason it is. To me, anyway. The cops took him back to the hotel, but May flat out told Narcy, you're not going to get away with this. Like, May knew it. She knew what was going on. So May and Narcy go back to Florida separately. May was already feeling super icky about the whole thing. 3 days later, she goes to Narcy and Ben's house, to the guest house, to get her things. Because she had some stuff there, and she just wanted to get it and just kind of be done with her mom. But she was suspicious. So she was going through papers and calendars, trying to basically, it seems like, be her own little amateur detective. Which, good for her. This is why I want... May, but by some weird reason you listen to this, I really want to be your friend. Because you sound like my kind of chick, really. Because you're like, I don't care my mom's a fucking psychopathic murderer. I'm going to prove it. And you know what? Good for her. I don't care who your mom is. Like, that sounds like it would be incredibly difficult and incredibly painful. But For some people, and I know that this is the way I feel, when there's an injustice like this, it just becomes like a bell in your head where you know it's wrong, and it just can drive you to insanity. I know I've experienced that in my life so many times. Situations that really didn't even involve me, but I felt in my gut and in my soul that it was an injustice, and it just doesn't sit right, especially for May, hitting this close to home, somebody that she obviously looked at as her father, who, in my mind, as a mom of an adopted son, that was her father. Blood be damned. And he was just murdered. And she knew who did it. And she was going to prove it. Good for you, May. So, because she was so suspicious, she's going through the papers and calendars and everything. And then Narcy comes up on her mother, with a freaking crowbar and attacked her and got her good in the arm. There's a big old bruise in the photo that the cops took. Narcy was freaking out and screaming that May is the one that killed Ben. Like, it had to be her. Narcy told the police that she didn't attack her and she just had the crowbar because May threatened to, quote, light her on fire. Okay. It doesn't look like any charges were pressed because they couldn't quite tell who the instigator was. Okay, whatever. Now, at Ben's funeral, they had worked this out. Narcy and May had worked it out to where either May would be at the viewing and Narcy would be at the funeral, or vice versa. But Narcy showed up at the funeral where May was with an army of bodyguards to protect her from her own daughter. And for me, looking back on it with hindsight being 2020, this was a show. This was part of her trying to frame the opinion of everybody around her own daughter as potentially being a murderer. And the killer part, and you could tell that this was a part that really got to May. And I, not judging, I would freak out too. One of the bodyguards purposefully flashed his gun at her children. This seemed to be under the orders of Narcy. Narcy threatening her own grandchildren at their grandfather's funeral and accusing their mother of murdering their grandfather when she's the one that did it. Like, spoiler alert, in case you haven't figured that out. What kind of raggedy bitch? That's a special kind of raggedy bitch right there. So after that, Narcy cleaned out Ben's safe deposit boxes. Now, there's a huge dispute about this. Her lawyer said that she had the right to do so, but other sources indicate that she didn't, and she lied to the bank, saying, oh, Ben is just outside in the car, when he had been dead for a week. And after that, she started liquidating everything that she could. She was also throwing lavish parties and spending money like crazy. It's actually funny. I just finished listening to the series that Last Podcast on the Left did on Lizzie Borden, which was an awesome series. I love that podcast so much. But they talked about the behaviors of people that kill for money will exhibit certain signs. Lizzie Borden didn't really exhibit any of those behaviors like the Menendez brothers did. But Narcy was in full-blown Lyle and Eric territory here, who immediately went out and bought these crazy expensive watches and suits and cars. So the investigation into his murder was still ongoing in New York, but a letter was received on July 17th at the Miami Springs, Florida Police Department. It was in Spanish, and it claimed that Bernice was murdered as well, and that Narcy, along with one of her brothers named Cristobal, were responsible. It claimed that he had found and hired hitmen to carry out the plan from Narcy. Now, the cops didn't buy it at first, but they did send the information up to New York. And the cops then went to Philadelphia, where Cristobal lived and was a bus driver, to talk to him. They didn't really learn anything, so they left. But while speaking with him, they did see that there were Western Union receipts where he was sending quite a bit of money to someone. So when he stepped away for a moment, they quickly wrote down, because they were in plain sight, they could do this, they quickly wrote down the receipt numbers and other information from those papers so they could look into it further. Like, why is a bus driver in Philadelphia sending money, Western Union, quite a bit of money, out to someone? Turns out later, this was him paying the hitmen he hired. This feels very low rent. Like, this isn't an offshore Cayman account. They're just doing it through Western Union. I guess it's paid assassin on a budget. But all the while, May was just getting more and more convinced that her mom was guilty. So on August 17th, she marched her little butt down to the courthouse and filed paperwork to stop her mom from getting her hands on any of Ben's estate until the murder investigation was wrapped up. Because in Florida, you can't claim, and this is a lot of states, I believe, in Florida, you can't claim any money from an estate if you had a hand in causing that person's death. Seems like a duh, but apparently we needed laws that said that. Now, when Narcy found out, she flipped. She lost her shit. Now, May described her uncle Cristobal as an idiot in one of the shows that I watched. Maybe in a couple of them. And he does seem like an idiot. And what he did next really solidified and proved that. So the day after May went to the courthouse and filed paperwork to stop her mom from getting any money from the estate, Cristobal called the cops back and changed his story. He told them, now all of a sudden, and the timing on this, for me, just cannot be ignored. It just can't be. The day after? Come on. All right, whatever. He told them that May is the one that organized the hit and framed her to frame her mother, excuse me. Okay. Again, this is a special kind of fucked up. This is his niece and Narcy's daughter, and you're trying to pin a murder on her that you damn well know she didn't do. There's like a very specific reserved level of hell for that. Now, 2 weeks later, he gives the cops all kinds of details about the hitmen. Again, this just solidifies that he's an idiot. You're trying to frame May while you're confessing to the crime. Okay. Whatever. Well, moving on. One of the hitmen was a man named Alejandro Garcia. He was just a troubled man all the way around. He was actually in jail at the time on another charge. So New York cops came to talk to him. And he spilled quickly and told them that it was Cristobal who set it up for someone. But he said it was Narcy that he set it up for, not May. Why would you point them to a hitman that now he's got to get himself out of trouble and he doesn't know the lie that you told? Like, I have a hard time believing that this would have been a pre-planned lie. If it was, he would have said, no, May is the one. But he didn't. He flat out said, no, it was not May, it was Narcy. You know what, May? I'm right there with you on Cristobal's an idiot. I think calling him an idiot is probably kind. Too kind. So he had pointed them to someone that they wouldn't have known about had he not told them, this Alejandro Garcia person. Now, something interesting was that really validated that Alejandro was at least there. He had a bad eye, and he always wore sunglasses. And one of the things they found in the hotel room was a broken pair of sunglasses. Now that they know what these two gentlemen obviously looked like, they also went back to the security cams and actually found them casing the hotel a few days before, and then found them on the security cams again the day of. When Garcia came into the hotel, he had on sunglasses. When he left, they were gone. Circumstantial, but pretty suspicious, I would say. So then he spills even more. There was another hitman named Joel Gonzalez, and he spilled something else. Ben wasn't the first hit that he was hired for. Bernice was. Remember poor Bernice who had an accident and fell with, a broken jaw, broken finger, blood spatter everywhere, total accident. I still don't know how you see those crime scene photos and not see that poor woman was beaten to death. That's just some of the laziest police work. But they confessed that she had been killed first. And he also confessed as to the reason why she had to die first. If Ben died before she did, she would have authority over his estate per Ben's will. So before Ben died, Bernice had to go, according to Narcy. And here's the kicker. He also had a picture of May, who was the intended next hit. Wow. I said there was a reserved level of hell. There's like a VIP level of hell. You're going to murder your own daughter. You're going to take out a hit on your own daughter. Dear Lord. So the cops kind of freak out. And this is kind of an aside to the story, but I really appreciated it. I thought it was awesome. It was frustrating, but awesome. The cops were trying to get May and her boys into protective custody. But unfortunately, with bureaucracies, things like that take time and paperwork. But one of the detectives was so freaked out for May that she loaned her $5,000 of her own money for her to get somewhere safe. Now, when the prosecution and her police department found out, she was removed from the case, which is frustrating. But at the same time, bless her. I believe that she probably saved that woman's life and her boys. Because clearly, Narcy has got problems. And she is not above murdering anybody, including her mother-in-law, her husband of 20 years, and her own daughter. Get her safe now. But again, moving on. 1 year almost to the day of Ben's murder, Narcy and Cristobal were arrested, with the two other hitmen agreeing to testify, Joel and Alejandro. They basically said it was all Narcy and Cristobal. And the prosecution had Cristobal on ATM cams with these two gentlemen traveling. They had their cell phone records. They had a lot. So here is what the two hitmen said happened once they got to the hotel and what happened in the room. They claimed that Narcy let them in the room and handed them a pillow to muffle Ben's screams. They also claimed, sorry for laughing, this is not funny, but my apologies. They also claimed that Narcy wanted his balls cut off, but they refused. They were like, we're not doing that. We're hitmen on a budget, and you didn't pay extra for that upgrade, I guess. I don't know. So instead, she demanded that they at least slit out his eyes. Now, right there tells any even novice student of true crime this was not a burglary or a random act of some kind. This kind of stuff, when people do stuff like that, that is called personal. If her goal was to make it look like a random robbery, she fucked up right there. But that's also a level of evil. And I guess at one point, one of the hitmen actually stepped away because it was just too much. And she basically pushed him back and was like, you get your ass in there and you do the job. She is next level cold. So in 2012, the case went to trial. And Narcy was pretty cocky, which if you've been listening to the story up until this point, you probably picked up on that in general. But she felt apparently that the case was too complicated to nail her. 2 murders, 2 different states, multiple people involved who all have different stories. They hadn't done a good investigation on the first murder because they had an accident. But at this point, because it was a multi-state situation, the feds had taken over. And if the feds are coming after you, there's a reason they have the track record that they do. Because they are going to bring a case. If they brought a case, it's statistically, you're fucked. Now, the defense, of course, tried to blame May, which was just laughable. Now, they put Cristobal on the stand. Again, you didn't pick the best and brightest here. And it, as expected, spoiler alert, it was a disaster. His story, and this is kind of one of the only times I've even heard of this being reported necessarily. I think I've heard it maybe once or twice, but for the most part, you don't really hear about stuff like this. But his story literally made the jury members roll their eyes and laugh out loud at him. After that spectacular failure, Narcy didn't testify, and both were convicted and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Now, Narcy refused to come into the courtroom for the verdict or her sentencing, which I didn't know you could do. But I do feel like that, again, speaks to her psyche. Not a doctor, can't diagnose anybody, don't want to diagnose anybody, but I do think it's interesting that at the point where it was time to face the music, somebody with narcissistic tendencies doesn't want to ever be told, this is the consequence of your action. But I feel like she was embarrassed and didn't want anyone to have any kind of satisfaction. What I also think is interesting, and this is just a sidebar tangent here, I feel like one of the reasons that she didn't come in for the verdict and for the sentencing was simply to stick it to May. She did not want to give May the satisfaction of seeing her face when she lost, basically. I really do think that the level of jealousy and, I don't want to say hatred, because I don't want to believe that she hates May, but maybe resentful. Maybe that's the word. She just could not stand to have May be validated, and she couldn't stand to see May validated. You know, May's the one that told her, you're not going to get away with this. And giving her any sort of closure or satisfaction was kind of like her final fuck you to her own daughter. But Cristobal was in the courtroom, and apparently he was totally dumbfounded. Which, again, I'm sorry, how are you dumbfounded? The jury laughed at you. They rolled their eyes at you. How are you dumbfounded? Did you just think that they were falling in love with you and they were flirting? What did you think was going to happen? Again, I'm going to co-sign it. May, he's an idiot. You absolutely correct. So the battle over the estate continued because it would go to May and her boys. But it seemed like other family members are fighting it, and it's just been a ton of court drama. I tried to find the resolution to it, but I don't think there has been one. The only thing I could really find was that May had requested that, I guess one of her children has serious health issues, and May had requested that the medical bills be paid out of the estate, and I believe it was. This, to me, again, doesn't speak to a woman who's just trying to get rich off of this situation. She just, hey, can you take care of my son's medical bills? Again, she seems like a really good person. Now, a PS to this story, which I thought was interesting, was, if you remember earlier in this episode, we talked about Ben Sr.'s first marriage to Bella. Now, Bella and Ben didn't have any biological children, but they did have an adopted son named Ronald. And when Ben blew up his family, apparently it seems like maybe he didn't support them, nothing, etc. But I guess when this all came out, Ronald came forward, and he was at the time experiencing homelessness and came out of the woodwork and apparently got some money from the estate. And it sounds a little bit, from what I was reading, it sounds a little bit like a Britney Spears conservatorship. Hopefully it's not the definition of pure evil like the Britney Spears conservatorship, but it seems like he's being taken care of by the estate, which, silver lining. May and her boys, I really hope that they found some peace and happiness after all of this drama. Just honestly, having Narcy out of her life, I really hope that by itself just gave May some closure, because she really deserves it. And she really deserves just to live in peace. So that is the first episode of Money and Murder with Lara Mack. If you guys like this, feel free to like, share, leave a comment. If you guys are like, no, we don't want to hear this. This is ridiculous. Just let me know. And I'm going to roll out a couple more of these. I have a few more planned that I'll roll out over the next few weeks while Tanya is busy. I'll let her share that news. But in the meantime, I hope you have a great week. I'm Lara Mack, and love your faces. Like what you hear? Rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes or your favorite podcasting platform. And follow us on our Facebook page by searching Q as in Cucumber. And we want to hear from you. Share your stories by emailing us at qasIncucumber@yahoo.com, and you might just hear your stories on a future episode. Love your faces.
This call may be monitored and recorded for quality assurance.